So, welcome everyone to the first episode of Blue Collar, White Collar. I'm joined with my co-host, much handsomer counterpart, Nick. Nick, introduce yourself.
Nick Wheeler Hughes. Mom's Wheeler, Dad's Hughes. Live in Montreal, but Kieran and I know each other from high school, which we both did in a little French school in Fredericton called École Sainte-Anne.
Okay, thank you for getting nice and personal. Now people know details about our entire life. So, the way this show is going to operate is that I am a blue-collar worker, and Nick is a white-collar worker, so we're going to bring two different perspectives on the world. He is also far more left-wing than I am. I am far more right-wing, although I don't consider myself fully right-wing. I'm more of a centrist, personally. And then we're going to try and give our worldviews in a more civilized fashion in order to try and cool down the conversation around the politics and the political environment that we currently live in, because personally I find it to be destructive to our civilization, and I think you probably agree with that as well.
Yeah,
it's not good.
It's bad for democracy, man. Like, democracy is built on this idea that we can disagree and coexist, right? That's the whole point. We have multiple parties, different perspectives. We need to be able to have those debates. That's how a country evolves. When you're a democracy, you change, right, over time. And autocracies don't change. They stay the same. So I think that healthy debate is an essential part of any democracy, and that, like, we're kind of losing that right now, where we're starting to really hate people on the opposite side. And, we're going to talk about the States today, but I think a lot of that is trickling up to Canada as well. And,
100%.
there's a lot of, I spend most of my time in progressive circles, and there's a lot of hate towards the conservatives, and I know that there's a lot of that feeling going back and forth. So happy to kind of just have a chat about policy and how we can kind of coexist and disagree without hating each other.
Unfortunately, I agree with you. I don't spend much time in conservative party circles, but I work with a lot of people who are fairly conservative, and oftentimes the way they speak about people who are liberal or left-leaning is not always great, and I don't appreciate it. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about who I am and my philosophy on the world, and hopefully you can follow up and do the same, Nicholas.
Yeah.
I am a father and a husband, a union member, and a structural steel worker. So I identify as a centrist libertarian. Most of my worldview with regards to politics is based off of voluntary interactions with people. I don't like authority. When things are forced upon people, generally I believe that comes with a worse outcome. So I believe in things like drug legalization on almost every kind of drug. I don't want heroin being distributed to kids and stuff, but I don't think people should be locked up for the things that they decide to do with their own bodies, even if it's something that I don't want for me and my family. I have a brother who's in recovery from suffering from addiction to substances, so I know how that can tear apart a family, but I also think that incarcerating people for these things also tears apart families and ruins lives. So I don't think that's a good thing. What about you, Nicholas?
I have a very different perspective. Like, my background is originally in teaching. I started my career as a teacher, but switched about 2 years ago towards political organizing. First was at West, and now I'm in Montreal. I'm working for an MNA, so that's member of the National Assembly. She's a provincial parliamentarian, but my role is less about the partisan politics and more about just kind of working in my community towards solutions around housing, green space, education, things like that. So it's a really cool job. But I think that for me and Kieran, where you and I fundamentally disagree, I think is just the role that we see government playing in people's lives.
More than likely, yes.
Yeah, like, on its most fundamental level, I think government can be a source of good, right? I actually believe in the power of government to do big things, good things. I think that when you look at some of the, biggest issues, I don't think that, the private sector, that a more individualistic approach is the way that you actually tackle these big problems. It is through collective action, right? It is through government. I think that there are ways that government can function much more effectively. We're so bogged down in red tape, and you see a lot of governments that are unable to make any meaningful changes in education, in housing, in healthcare. And so I think that we're seeing an erosion of people's trust in the government's ability to do good things. A lot of people feel like we're being highly taxed and not getting it back in the way that we would want. But that's because there are ways that we need to make the system work better. But just fundamentally, I think the government can play a very positive role in people's lives if we enable it correctly.
So I'm actually going to disagree with you on the disagreement. I agree with much of what you said. I think the government can be a force for good in people's lives. Generally, I think when government does its best work when it comes from the bottom up, preferably when government has solutions. I prefer when local governments and then provincial governments and then lastly federal governments have actions on things. This way people have more and more of a say on the things that go on in their lives. And yes,
totally.
You're entirely correct that the bureaucracy and the red tape is eroding people's trust. Not only that, there's corruption. And I think the higher up, the more distant from the individual citizens, the more likely there is corruption. So I generally don't have a big problem with my local government. I have smaller problems with my provincial government, and then once you get to federal government, that's when I have more and more problems with. Not just because we have a liberal government. I'm not a fan of the things that they did with the Harper government. So just government in general, when it comes to federal politics, I think there should be less and less done by the federal government. And with regards to collective action, I'm 100% in agreement with you that there are certain things like your major thing, climate, that is something that we need to work together as a people. But I also think that individual actions are also necessary. Every person should be doing the things that they can do in their own life to improve the state of our environment. We can't just rely on the government to fix those problems for us. If every individual takes those actions, the government will need to do less and less, and I think that would be for the better.
Do you want to talk about climate, or do you want to get into the subject of our discussion today, which is the election?
Well, we'll get to the climate eventually. I was just elaborating slightly on your points.
Yeah, I have a pretty big point where I disagree with you. But
okay, go ahead if you want.
Discussion. I think my point is just that the only entity that can go after the big polluters is government, right? Individually, yes, we can do as much as we can, right? We can try to make choices that reduce our carbon footprint, but even the concept of the carbon footprint is created by the fossil fuel industry to kind of shift blame away from them on us. And so we are, oftentimes so consumed by how can we, live more sustainable lives, make more sustainable choices. And actually, that makes us spend less time looking at where the biggest, source of emissions is coming from. And it's not from people; it's from industry, specifically, in the energy sector. So I think that, like, for me, my biggest thing is the government needs to be courageous enough, and B, strong enough to actually go after these major polluters. So that's kind of where I would disagree with you. Should we also be mindful of our own choices? Absolutely. I try to, make those choices myself, but I, also keep my eyes on the prize and am mindful of the fact that, it is fossil fuel industry that is the major problem, and we kind of seem to forget that sometimes.
Well, I'm sure I have plenty that I would disagree with you over in that space, but I think you're right that we should move on to our main topic, which today we are going to be talking about the upcoming United States federal election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, who I'm sure you're a much bigger opponent of than I am. I personally don't have major problems with him. I have problems with him that would make me not want to vote for him as a person. But I also have many problems with Kamala. But I think I'm going to start out by saying some things that I think that she's done really well. And I hope that you will be able to say some things that maybe policy decisions or actions that he had as a president that you actually think that he did well, or that you would support. So one of the things that I really...
Should we dig into the people specifically, or should we just talk about the broader themes of the election first? I kind of feel like that's where we should start, is like, what is this election about for you, like from your perspective? And, we're kind of keeping on this blue collar, white collar theme. And so maybe from that perspective, from the blue collar perspective, you can kind of look at the 2024 American election and speak as best you can on behalf of how blue collar workers are looking at and thinking about this election.
Sure. I would like to go into what I was talking about earlier, but we can do that slightly farther.
Frame the discussion before getting into more specifics of the candidates and the policies. Let's kind of start big. Let's start macro, and then we can kind of zoom in a little bit more.
Sure. So for me, as a blue collar individual, one of the things, as a union member, I see two people who both claim to support union workers and both claim to support the middle class. And it seems to me that while culturally one of them seems to agree more on issues with the people that I work with and the people of my background, there is one party that seems to be better at dealing with unions in general, and that is one of the things that I would have spoken about in what I was referring to earlier. I think the Democratic Party in general is better at dealing with unions, and so I think that's the main focus on the economics of the situation for me and the people around me. Where I work, we might not have mentioned that Nick and I are both Canadians, so it's kind of silly that we're talking about American politics, but where I work, a lot of our work comes from the United States. We get contracted jobs for various places in the States, and so when stuff goes south economically there, it actually impacts me as well. I was laid off for 4 months this past year because we lost a lot of jobs down in the U.S. due to just a lack of development, a lack of buildings being built. I worked on airplane hangars, university buildings, all sorts of things. And when there's not development, there's not the jobs. And that's my main focus with regards to the economic sector. And that's why I care about the union stuff with regards to the United States politics. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter to me. The culture stuff would matter to me in that aspect, would matter more to me if it weren't for that. What about you, Nick?
It's interesting, too, and, I think another thing that we should just point out off the top here is that, Kieran, you're a dad, you're a husband, you're a homeowner. I am none of those things.
Absolutely.
And I think that, that changes the way you think about your vote. And it changes what is important to you when you look at different candidates. Obviously, we're not voting in the American election, but we're still consuming a lot of American media, and obviously, what happens down in the States has a huge impact on us as well.
Canada's basically the little brother to the United States. Yeah. Someone said this I thought was quite funny, was United States and Canada are Great Britain's children. One of them went and lived with mom, one of them went and lived with dad.
Kinda, yeah. Although I would almost say that we're still living with mom, and the United States like went off on their own and made it pretty big, made it pretty successful.
They moved out of Dad's house a long time ago.
Yeah, exactly.
The fact that we still have a monarchy, which is something that I would advocate against, proves that we still live in Mom's house.
Yeah, it's true. Although, actually, let's not get into that. Okay, so for me, when I look at the election, and obviously, the things that I'm looking for are perhaps different. But for me, I just think that the question that Americans are being asked right now is, what kind of country do we want to be? And the values that each of these two candidates espouses are fundamentally different, right? And so, I have my issues with Kamala Harris. She is flawed, as every person and politician is flawed. But, we just finished the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, that wrapped up last Thursday. And the message that was coming out of the DNC was hope and joy, right, and positivity, and looking out for each other. And I just thought that those were values that I think are the best of America. The RNC, meanwhile, I feel represented the worst of America. It was about vengeance. It was about, us versus them. It was about we must defeat the, evil, deep state Democrats, or else it is the end of the world, right? And we will only accept the results of the election if we win, which was the message that I got from the RNC and from Trump specifically. So I just think that when the world looks at America, and when we Canadians look at America, do we want a president who stands for the future and who stands for hope, and actually caring about other people, or do we want a leader who incites violence and who really only cares about power and cares about himself? I find Donald Trump completely deplorable as a leader, as a person, and I have spent a long time thinking about why people support Trump, and I think I have a pretty good understanding of it. Trump is not appealing to someone like me. However, I understand that people in different spaces can be drawn to Trump for a bunch of different reasons. But yeah, I just think that, big picture, what one party stands for hope, and the other party stands for fear.
I'd have to disagree with you on that. I watched both the RNC and the DNC, and I saw the fear coming from both parties. They mentioned Trump's name, referring to all of the horrible things that he plans on enacting. That's their words. Almost 400 times. The RNC spoke about the deep state, not specifically deep state Democrats. There's tons of deep state Republicans, many of them who Trump actually had in his cabinet the first time around. So not exactly draining the swamp there. But there is hope coming from both sides. You just have to look at it, and you just have to... The Democrats are better at messaging. Personally, I feel that the hope message is just their way of recycling the 2008 Hope and Change Barack Obama. It felt to me like they were just copying that and pasting it on a new candidate. I think it worked well. It came off like it was a success. It seemed like one hell of a party, whereas the RNC seemed very somber. Like it was very... I don't know, it was definitely boring to watch, except when Hulk Hogan tore his shirt off. That was kind of wild.
Well, okay, so it's hard to think back because so much has happened since the RNC, right? Biden was still a candidate during the RNC. And I actually don't think that the RNC was boring necessarily. The last day of the RNC after Trump spoke, people were revved up, right? Republicans were so confident that they were going to win, right?
Oh yeah, it was in the bag for them.
Trump had just got shot the like Friday before or the Saturday before, right?
Yeah.
Big bandage on his ear, and so there was this huge narrative with the RNC around Trump being chosen by God, right? Saved by God in order to fulfill his divine purpose and become president again, and lead America into paradise or whatever. I think that people were looking across at Biden. I think that they were framing the election as strength versus weakness. Trump equals strength, Biden equals weakness. I think people were excited about J.D. Vance for about 10 seconds, but those 10 seconds were the RNC, and
Pretty much.
It's like they were revved up, right? They came out of that, and obviously around that time there was a lot of rumors, or not rumors, but a lot of talk about what would happen to Biden and whether he would drop out, and all the Republicans were saying it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter who, whether Biden drops out or not, and if he does, it doesn't matter who replaces him, whether it be Kamala Harris, whether it be Gavin Newsom or Josh Shapiro or whoever, right?
J.B. Pritzker.
Yeah, yeah. But they were all saying it doesn't matter, right? And I think that when Biden drops out, endorses Harris, and the whole Democratic Party basically coalesces behind her in the space of like a day,
I would believe
it was unbelievable, right? It was actually unbelievable how this kind of pent up energy that progressives had, and the gloom that they were feeling about Biden was just like swept away in an instant, and boom, we have someone to get excited about. And you got to give it to her. Kamala has really changed the tone of this, of this race, and nothing points to that more than her choosing Tim Walz. Right? There was a bunch of different people who she was considering for her VP, but she chose Tim Walz. Why? Because Tim Walz totally changed the way that Democrats were talking about Trump. Right? When it was Biden, it was existential. It was the fate of democracy, right? And we cannot let Trump win. It was kind of trying to use fear. And what Tim Walz did, and I think the reason that Kamala chose her, is he coined this idea of Republicans are weird, and specifically, Republican leaders. He's not talking about Republican voters, but he's talking about Trump. He's talking about Vance. He's talking about some of these people in their circles, the Project 2025 people, who are just like weirdos, right? And I think that that's true. Like Trump is just a strange man. He is a convicted criminal, and he is an abuser of women, and he's also just a freaking weirdo. And I think that almost, I heard someone recently say it was kind of like the emperor has no clothes, right? This idea that this big bad monster that Biden had basically put up on a pedestal, right? Biden made Trump bigger. And what Kamala has done is she's made him smaller. She's made him petty. And
yeah, she made fun of the bully. Instead of raising the bully to raising him up, made him seem all-powerful. What she did is she started mocking him. And this is another one of the things that I wanted to point out that I think is one of the best things that she has done in her campaign. She has toned it down from existential to she went from this man is Hitler to this man is to be made fun of.
Yeah.
And I think that's the winning approach, personally, because Hillary Clinton tried this man is going to destroy our country, and it failed. And Joe Biden may have won 2020, but it was close. And if it wouldn't have been for COVID and mail-in ballots, he probably would have lost that election. The economy was already taking a downturn, and that probably shifted enough people in order to give Biden the victory. And this approach of you're just a silly man, is so much better, and I think it's so much better for the country, the United States, because it's less divisive. So many more people are going to be willing to vote for you, in my opinion, when you don't say, look, this guy is going to destroy our country. When you say, well, he has a lot of bad things that he's going to do that we're going to fight against, but he's just a silly Republican like any Republican could be. And he may be worse than other ones in their opinion, but they're not making it a life or death situation. I think that's going to bring a lot more independence to their side.
Things. Yeah, two things. I think one is that Biden was asking voters to vote against something, right? He was saying, you cannot vote for Trump. You have to vote for me, because if Trump gets a second term, it's going to be chaos, right? So vote for me so that Trump doesn't win, right? Vote against Trump by voting for me. Kamala has showed up and said, no, vote for something, right? Vote for a vision of the future. And that is, I think, fundamentally how the race has shifted, where it previously, the story was around strength versus weakness, right? And now it feels like the election is being defined by future versus past, where Trump, yes, there's this idea of make America great again. Let's go back to when America was so great. And we were the more traditional values that a lot of older people specifically subscribe to. But I think that also, after everything that has happened, Trump very much wants to get revenge, right? He wants to use the power of the office to right the so-called wrongs that he feels has been inflicted upon him, and really go after his political opponents, right? So this idea that I think the Democrats have executed on beautifully is saying Trump is the past, and Kamala is the future. And they chanted this over and over again at the DNC, right? We're not going back. We're not going back. Kamala represents...
Felt kind of hammy to me personally, but...
But at the same time, people... across the political spectrum in America, many of them were very disappointed with the, Trump-Biden binary, where they felt discouraged and not wanting to vote for either candidate because they were old, because they felt like this, generation that no longer was in touch with more modern values. And I think that Kamala is very much a different generation, and that people are excited about someone who is energized and who is, smiling and bringing this kind of joy to the campaign that was, so depressing for so long.
Yeah, she's definitely a different generation, but she's not exactly a new.
She's 59.
She's not exactly a new generation. She's still a boomer.
Yes, but she's 22 years younger than Biden, right?
Which is an improvement. I'll give him that.
And frankly, you don't want a 40-year-old president either, right? Late 40s to early 60s is kind of the sweet spot, I think.
I'd agree with that. Maybe even mid 40s. I'd take 45.
Well, I think Obama was 45 when he first got elected. Trudeau was even younger. And Poilievre, how old is Poilievre?
I'm not certain.
I think he's 42. So if he gets in next year, it'll be 43. Anyway. But the second point that I wanted to make was just, distinguishing between, and I think that the Democrats are doing a good job of this, is distinguishing between the kind of Republican leaders, MAGA leaders, and then Republican voters, right? And I think that what they want to do is say things, use terms like weird when they're talking about Trump and J.D. Vance and Marjorie Taylor Greene, these people who, I'm sorry, are absolutely weird. And I think that messaging is super effective because it's true.
It's incredibly good messaging, but personally I would argue that they're all weird.
Marjorie Taylor Greene is a nut job.
Yeah.
No one is crazier than Marjorie Taylor Greene.
There's literally insane people. So I'm arguing with you for argument's sake at this point, but yeah.
Name me one person who has ever been elected who is crazier than Marjorie Taylor Greene.
George Santos.
Well done.
My favorite congressman in U.S. history.
I gotta say, that's just fucking hilarious. I'm sorry. Are we allowed to swear?
Oh yeah, I don't give a shit.
You don't give a shit? The George Santos story is so funny. But do you hear Marjorie Taylor Greene's speech at the RNC?
No, I skipped that one. I
Okay.
think she's irrelevant personally.
She's a small fish, but when she's giving her speech, like basically during like applause lines and like pauses, she starts like kind of like quietly laughing under her breath. She'll just go and then she's speaking, and then again people are clapping, and she goes. It's super weird. You should watch it.
Yeah, well, if you want to talk about people strangely laughing, cackling Kamala, that's basically her thing, laughing at inappropriate times. I mean, I criticize her for that, but also my favorite pick from the 2020 Democratic primary, Andrew Yang, he also does that a fair amount, but it doesn't seem as, I don't know if it's just her laugh is more off-putting than his, so I can't criticize it too much.
I just think, Trump has tried out a bunch of nicknames for Kamala, right? And none of them have really stuck. But wasn't Laughing Kamala one of them?
The fact that he didn't go with cackling, it's an alliteration. Laughing Kamala? Seriously? Cackling, it's right there. Come on. Alliteration sticks so much better. I'm also mad that his nicknames have gotten so much worse over time. Like, he's recycling them. You can't just keep calling people corrupt. Like, you can't just... It doesn't work. You got to come up with new nicknames.
That's the problem with the Republican Party overall, right? Is they use the same arguments for everyone. It's like, oh, they're dangerously liberal. Like, oh, she's more liberal than Bernie Sanders. It's like, no, she's not, actually. She is very much, center left. She has, some progressive views, but she also has some more moderate views, right? Like, I think that why Kamala is appealing to so many people is that she can kind of toe that line. But the point is that Republicans just, they automatically go to dangerously liberal, right? She's far left. She's a communist. Okay. But it's like, heard this line every single time. It's the same things you were saying about Biden, right? So it's just like, it's not unique. I don't think that they were prepared with like a cohesive line of attack. I still haven't seen an obvious one. They've kind of thrown a bunch of stuff at the wall, and nothing really seems to be sticking right now. And I think that's why, in a lot of places, she's taking back ground that Biden was ceding to Trump, and it's still very close. And I don't think that anyone is under the impression that this is going to be a landslide victory for Kamala. But at the same time, it's like, now we got a real race here,
Yeah, so 3 things on that. 1, people calling Joe Biden a communist and now Kamala a communist is laughable. Communist is very, it's a specific thing. These people are not communists. They might say things that are socialist and have mildly socialist beliefs, but it's typically more close to your European Socialist Party beliefs. They're not communists. I hate when they do that. It's ridiculous.
Right? It's just fear-mongering. It's just, hey, remember the Cold War, right? Remember the Soviets? They were bad.
Yeah.
Remember, Stalin and Mao, like, they sucked. So,
2, second thing.
Stupid.
Second thing, to be fair, the Democrats do the exact same thing. Every time they run, they call Republicans racist. When Mitt Romney was running against Barack Obama, Joe Biden literally, to a giant group of black people, said that he wants to put y'all back in chains. It's not a new tactic. They've been doing it for a long time. And then, 8 years later, when he's running against Donald Trump, he talks about how he wished that it was a good man like Mitt Romney. So was Mitt Romney someone who wanted to re-enslave black people, or was Mitt Romney a good man?
Super fair, but you do have to admit that Trump is like way more racist than previous Republican candidates. Like, I don't know too much about what Mitt Romney said. Like, he actually seems like a pretty decent fellow to me. Same thing with John McCain. I I don't know. Like, I wasn't super deep into politics in 2008 and 2012, but like, you do have to admit that like Trump is a racist.
No, I don't necessarily agree with that. I've listened to a fair amount of him talk, and he says a lot of things that you can easily pull as being a racist, but you can do that with a lot of different people, a lot of different context. Most of the time when he talks about things and he's talking about, you know, them not sending their best from Mexico, he's not talking about all Mexicans, things like that. So it's very easy to categorize him in such ways because he's not an eloquent speaker. He talks in generalities, and that's why he's so appealing to blue-collar people, because he speaks like a blue-collar person. He speaks like he has spent his entire life working with his hands, working around people with their hands.
Hasn't.
No, I know he hasn't, but he's actually been like, he knows how to talk to them because he's spent a lot of time around them. When he's building buildings, he has to work with the people who are actually building these edifices. And the last thing I was going to say is the reason that they say that Kamala is more liberal than Bernie Sanders is because her Senate record is she voted yes more times with the Democratic Party than Bernie Sanders did. But that doesn't mean that her positions on such things are more left-wing. Bernie Sanders probably voted no because they didn't go far enough.
Yep.
And so that's how they came up with it. It was a statistic that she had voted yes with the Democratic Party more times than any other senator, and all that means to me is that she is a establishment party person. That's why she was chosen for her to be vice president, because one, she's a black woman, and two, maybe that's two. Number one being she is part of the establishment. There was very important to them. Sorry, what was that?
What about highly qualified?
I don't think she's highly qualified. There are many people who are either more qualified or equally as qualified as her that didn't get chosen because they are outsiders, or they had dissenting opinions, or because they weren't women of color, whereas Joe Biden specifically said he was going to pick a woman of color. So is she qualified? That's very possible. I'm not someone who is going to evaluate this because I am not a political operative. But to me, she feels like she is just a run-of-the-mill standard politician.
Do you want to spend a bit of time talking about, this argument that is thrown around a lot, which is that Kamala was only chosen because she's a black woman?
So my comments on that is she was chosen because she's
want to have that discussion.
I don't agree with it, so I can only give you what I agree with it. Yes, okay. She was chosen because she was a black woman. No, she was not only chosen because she was a black woman. Joe Biden specifically said he was going to choose a black woman, but he did not choose just any black woman.
A black woman.
No, he said woman of color. Sorry. He did say he was going to choose a woman of color. He did.
No, he didn't. He said, I'm going to choose a woman. And then we found out that internally they were really only considering women of color. But just to set the record straight, he said, my vice president will be a woman.
Okay. Even if that's true, I will have to go back and see if I can find audio of him saying. But yes, so she was partially, it was one criteria chosen because she was a woman. And if what you are saying is correct.
That the leadership of a country reflects the country? Don't you think that it's a problem that just having white men at the top governing a country that is as diverse as the United States is a problem?
I don't think it needs to be fully representative if the people that vote for these people are... So Joe Biden brought more black people to vote for him than Kamala did. So to them... he represented what they wanted more than she did. So when the Republican primary was going on, the person that I saw that I liked the most was not a white guy, was an Indian man. And I would rather vote for an Indian man who agreed with things that I agreed with, or in 2020 when it was the Democratic nomination, the person that I agreed the most with was a Asian man. And so to me, it does not matter. I don't care. There are certain things that I think it matters. when it comes to policing in neighborhoods, should there be a better representation of the people? I think that matters. When it comes to your elected officials, over time, that's naturally going to happen. It just will. You look now, you have Rashida Tlaib's, you have Ilhan Omar's, you have people of all races. Yeah, the people at the top are mostly white guys, but that's just because they're all really old and have been there for like 50 years. You have your Nancy Pelosi's, your Chuck Schumer's, your Joe Biden's that have been there for generations. And that's the reason that it's like that. Do I think it should be purposefully engineered to achieve that result? No. Do I think that it would be fine if it is that way, to have a diverse electorate? Yeah, I think that, or a diverse, yeah, but to me it doesn't matter. If you represent the policies that those people want better than someone of their race, that person should be the person who gets elected.
Okay. Here's my perspective, and it's quite different from yours. Because we're basically having the affirmative action conversation right now, right? We're talking about this idea of bringing people of greater diversity into places of power, into spaces of higher education, into spaces, where they can become leaders, right? So on one hand, and the argument that I've heard a lot is we should just have the best people in the best positions, and it doesn't matter who they are, right? And that's kind of what I hear you saying. And, if it were as simple as everyone has equal opportunity, and that, who the most qualified people are, just so happen to be people who are both men and women and of all races, right? The fact of the matter is that's not the case, right? We know that people of different races have different levels of opportunity, right? We know that men have more opportunity than women. That's changing. You disagree?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's look at, CEOs across the country. Let's look at, people in positions of power, whether they be elected officials. Like, it is majority men, right? That's a fact.
Nick, who votes more, men or women?
Joe Biden in 2020, he gets the Democratic nomination. He's thinking about his vice president, right? I think that when you are governing a country that is as diverse as the United States, I think that it is important to have a reflection of that. But more importantly, and this is why I also agree with Justin Trudeau's decision in 2015 to have a gender-balanced cabinet, it's that when you put people, like white men are just less inclined to enact policies that are going to help people who are women or people of color, right? And that's why for so long in our history, and this is only just changing now, right? But for basically all of the history of Canada, of the United States, we have had white men as leaders.
I disagree.
Right? Sorry, you disagree with the fact that we've had white men as like presidents and prime ministers?
No, I disagree with what you said about white guys being less inclined to enact policies to help women and people of color. It was exclusively, Nick, it was exclusively white people and white men who gave women the right to vote. If they didn't want to elect them,
be elected at that time because women were considered second-class citizens.
Okay, but still, they didn't have to do it. They didn't have to do it, and they did, because men care about women. And it was exclusively white people who enacted the civil rights movement. If they did not want to do that, they would not have done that. Those are two things that benefited minorities and women more than any other policies that could be enacted.
I'm not saying that all white men who have ever been in office are racists who only want other white men to succeed, right? You look at JFK, you look at Lyndon B. Johnson, right? Allies of the civil rights movement, right? And they did a whole lot, right, to help, black people get the vote in the United States and all kinds of other civil rights. However, that, was a turning point after a long history of that having not been the case, right? And so you have all these examples of previous presidents and vice presidents who were not prioritizing helping people who did not look like them, who did not have similar backgrounds from them. And even after black people got the right to vote, it still took until 2008 to elect the first black president.
But that's
and when
not...
we did, we had never had a woman become either president or vice president. We have still not had a woman to become president. Hopefully we're about to get our first. But I just think the fact, and I think that history is the only example that you need, it's that until you are putting people in positions of power who reflect the diversity of the country, that you're actually not going to see change move nearly as quickly as it needs to reflect modern values and modern realities. So that's my perspective.
I don't think that you need to have people who look a certain way to end up with policies that help those people personally. That's just my philosophy, and I don't think that men across the board enact policies to benefit men. I don't think that men enact policies across the board, only white people enact policies across the board to only benefit white people. That's ridiculous. In a democracy, you need a majority to get elected, and so people go where the majority is. If the majority is mostly white people, that's normal, but sometimes it's 10% blacks and 45% whites, and so you have to go for some of the black people, and so it's a balancing game. And yet it's unsurprising that people tend to try and court the majority of the people, and the majority of the United States has been white for a long time. And yeah, it takes a long time to convince some people to vote in certain ways. Is it surprising that it took 50 years in order to get a black president? That really doesn't surprise me at all. How many black prime ministers has Canada had? Are we more racist than the United States? You tell me that. Do you think Canada's more racist than the United States? Do you think we're more sexist than the United States? We haven't had a female prime minister.
Yes, we have.
Have we?
Mm-hmm.
I clearly don't know my history very well. Who?
Kim Campbell, 1993.
Okay, well, I'll take it back then.
Well, very briefly, and I don't blame you for not knowing.
Okay, was she elected, or did the party swap her out like happened with Paul Martin?
That's exactly right. She was not elected.
Okay, so that doesn't count in my opinion. Yes, she was the prime minister, but she was not voted the prime minister.
Yeah, she didn't win a general election. But I think that Canada, are we? I don't know. We could go down this rabbit hole. I think that we face a lot of the similar challenges that the United States faces. I think that if you look at the array of parliamentarians, people elected to the House of Commons, there is more diversity than in the United States. However, I also think that it's true that we've only had white people as prime ministers. We had a female prime minister for, I think, 8 months. This is just post Brian Mulroney.
Liz Truss.
Liz Truss, yeah. Although, the UK elected their first female prime minister in 1980, right?
Yeah, she was a boss.
I am super anti-Margaret Thatcher.
That doesn't surprise me one bit.
Right. I actually think, and I think it's great that, that the Irish came in, just from a perspective of, feminism, but I think that the policies that Margaret Thatcher enacted were so brutally bad. And
that woman helped take down the Soviet Union. She will be forever in my good graces for that. She helped so many people be unoppressed by helping take down the Soviet Union. I don't care what any of her other policies are. I actually agree with many of her other policies, but that alone puts her in the history books as one of the greatest prime ministers the UK will ever have.
Well, let's just be very clear. Winston Churchill defeated the Nazis, right?
Okay.
Period.
Well, him and the United States, but
yeah, she came in, and yes, she, along with a string of other
40 years later,
American leaders, all ultimately facilitated the the downfall of the Soviet Union. She played a role in that, yes. And I think that
No,
a
it
lot
was
of the
her
time,
and Ronald Reagan. Her and Ronald Reagan took down the Soviet Union together. And Gorbachev, but he was the man on the inside.
yeah, I agree with that. I think that the Soviet Union had been weakening for some time, but I do agree that they were the ones that delivered the final blow. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about.
I think we've deviated quite a bit from our original subject matter. So I would like to take it back to what I'd originally going to talk about. I want to talk about the things that I personally think that Kamala is doing well. Because I think it's important to be able to say, although I would not vote for this person, I think that she's doing things that are good. So, number one, I think that the fact that she's following Joe Biden's union policies is very good. I think the fact that she seems to be likely to replace Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary, I think that's a good thing. I think she is going to do good things on antitrust. That's another thing that I think has been a good part of Joe Biden's administration. And the fact that she has, as we brought up earlier, has turned the intensity down from existential threat to look at this silly man, I think is one of the most important things, because ratcheting up the tension, even if she wins the election, if she continues to ratchet up the tension, I think ultimately it could lead to the downfall of the United States as a country. But the fact that she turned down the volume, the intensity, is likely to be a good thing for the country in the long run, whether or not she wins.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, I agree with you.
Now, is there anything that you can think of that Donald Trump has done or has spoken about doing that you think is beneficial or good?
Domestically, no. Internationally, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the Abraham Accords are a big success. I think that his killing of who was that guy, like Soleimani? Do you remember that?
Yes. Qasem Soleimani, was that him?
Yeah. I think, for example, and this is actually something that I still think about, and I see the arguments on both sides, but just, I think that the Iran nuclear deal is, I admit that I lean more towards the Republican approach to Iran, which is, let's just completely isolate them from the world. Let's put major tariffs on them. Let's cripple their economy. And that, in and of itself will make it harder to develop nuclear weapons. I think that what Obama did and what Biden continued to do, and that I disagree with, is to actually remove those tariffs to help, in exchange for Iran seizing their nuclear program. And I do see the big picture argument, which is we need to bring Iran into the fold. We want Iran to cease being the enemy and the ally of Russia and North Korea and our geopolitical rivals, and actually try to bring them more towards the West. So I think that's ultimately the purpose of the Iran nuclear deal. I think that the fact that Iran was able to fund terrorist groups like Hezbollah, like Hamas, is part of the reason that we saw October 7th happen. And I think that Republicans actually do have a point when they say maybe October 7th never happens under a Trump presidency. I think there is some merit to that argument. So, yeah.
Interesting. So I have one question about that then. So are you aware of the judicial reform that Trump enacted? Do you remember he was working with Kim Kardashian for several months?
No.
Yeah, so he actually, I think it's called the First Step Act. So you should look that up, because that's probably one thing that you will look into, and you will probably say, I think that was a good thing that he did that. I could be wrong about that. I'm not completely versed in the details. But
what is it?
You'll have to look into it. I don't have all the details offhand. But it was some judicial reform to help people get out of jail easier that were either, I believe it was either that had served terms, or I'm not fully versed on what it is, but I think it's something that you would think that was a good thing that he did. Now, what do you said you were a big fan?
I'm just reading it now. The act aimed at reforming federal prisons and sentencing laws in order to reduce recidivism, decreasing the federal inmate population, and maintaining public safety. On the surface, that looks pretty good.
That's always the case with policies, though. On the surface, they say they're going to do one thing, and then is that the result of what happens?
The goal at least is a good one. I agree with.
Yeah. Now, what do you take of the idea that October 7th wouldn't have happened if it weren't for, because you said you were a fan of the Abraham Accords, because the Abraham Accords kind of just put the whole Palestine question, they just kind of put it in a box and said, we're not even going to talk about this. And that they felt put into a place where if they didn't act, they were going to be forgotten.
Yep. But would they have been able to act? Would they have had the resources that allowed them to actually execute on the October 7th attack without the funding, without the resources that were basically funneled to them from Iran, right? Because that's where all of their money comes from. My understanding of the Abraham Accords, and I don't have a super clear understanding, and maybe this is crazy, and I, if I were to dig deeper into it, I would realize that the things that I'm saying are just bonkers. But my understanding is that it brought Saudi Arabia and Israel closer together, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
It began a process of normalizing relations between the two countries. And so I think that Iran and Palestinians are looking at that going, okay, well, if this moves ahead without any interference, then all of a sudden we are going to be even more isolated. Israel is going to be stronger because of its normalized relationship with the other Middle Eastern superpower, that being the Saudis. So we need to essentially do something to put the question of Palestinian independence and a Palestinian state back on the table. And the answer to that question of how do we do that was, let's slaughter Jews.
Unfortunately, this is one place where there is no light between, or there is only light. I don't know how that metaphor would work. Anyway, where the Democrats and the Republicans both seem to be extremely aligned is they don't seem to, mildly in rhetoric recently with Kamala talking about the Palestinians. The Republicans and Democrats both seem very keen on endlessly funding Israel and the slaughter that is going on in Palestine currently. And as I said,
that's not true.
Kamala has...
Trump doesn't give a shit about Gaza and Palestinians.
No, but he wants to support Israel. He's going to support Israel, 100%.
Absolutely, and that's my point. That Trump would basically say, Netanyahu, we're going to keep sending you weapons, do whatever the hell you want. You can just, totally tear Gaza to shreds and reduce it to rubble if you want. I don't care. What I think Kamala is trying to do is take a stronger stance than Biden did, because you're right that there wasn't, a ton of light between Trump and Biden. Biden, I think over time did become a little tougher on Israel, but his goal was to try to find a compromise, but he leaned too far into the Israel side, and I think that we got to call it what it is, right? Netanyahu's government has committed war crimes in Gaza, right?
100%.
Against women, against people who had nothing to do with the attack, and absolutely, Israel has the right to defend itself, and I think that some level of retaliation was necessary, and how do you get rid of Hamas? Great question. It doesn't seem to be going very well right now anyway, even though they have, killed tens of thousands of innocent civilians. and Hamas still very much appears alive and well.
Well, there's an old adage: if you have 20 terrorists and you kill 10, how many terrorists do you have?
100.
Because their entire family is going to be radicalized.
Well, yeah, and beyond that, right?
So this is a thing that I've been thinking recently, and it's kind of strange. And I know you said that he's going to support Netanyahu completely. What do you think of the idea that Donald Trump is so petty that because Netanyahu congratulated Joe Biden so fast on winning the election that Donald Trump still thinks that he won, that he will actually be petty enough to try and get someone else elected and support Israel, not Netanyahu?
No, I don't buy that.
I know he's pretty petty.
He is petty, but I think all indications point to Netanyahu wanting Trump to come back into office.
Oh, 100%. Right? Yeah, he does, but that doesn't mean that Trump wants Netanyahu there.
I disagree. I think that they would have a very positive relationship if Trump were to win. Anyway, listen. Let's kind of come back to it. Let's kind of maybe have some closing points. I don't want to go on too long here, but maybe do you want to just kind of think about how you want to close this out?
Yeah. So I'd like to mostly just summarize that. Here, you know what I'll do? I'll give my argument as to why. So I personally think Kamala is going to win. My good friend Dan, he seems to think otherwise, even though we're very much in agreement on many policy sides. But I think that Kamala is going to win because one of the things you said is that she is bringing a forward-centric vision of the country. 2, she is toned down the rhetoric with regards to how awful Donald Trump is, and therefore is likely going to bring more independents into the fold. 3, she is not Joe Biden, and therefore people are more likely going to want to vote for her because she's not a senile old man. And so when they were very upset about having it, all of a sudden they're like, a person who's alive? Holy shit, fuck yeah. Do I have to vote for between a 60-year-old woman and a 80-year-old man? They're probably going to choose the person who's less likely to die in the next few years.
Let's be very clear, right? There are a lot of people, older seniors who are 80, 85, 90, who are very animated and, doing just fine. Trump is 78, right? They're only they're literally one term apart, right? One presidential term apart, yeah. Biden and Trump. The difference, though, is that Trump does not come across as this super old man, right? Whereas Biden, especially, in the last couple of years, he just seems so old. Like,
well, in my opinion, he likely has dementia in some form. It might not be.
You don't need to speculate what's going on with it. I think that
I've had family members who had dementia, and it seems like that's the case. I would say that that's the case, and. The same thing was happening to, I believe it was Reagan in his last administration, and a lot of the same symptoms. It was just happening earlier because he was younger. But yeah, so Donald Trump might be old, but he's not senile, and that's the difference between the two of them. But now that Kamala is running against him, she's the one who seems fresh. She's the one who seems energetic. She's the one who seems like she could last 8 years instead of 3 months. Who knows how long Joe Biden would have survived a second term. In my opinion, he probably wouldn't have lasted 4 more years. If Joe Biden passes away in the next 4 years, I would not be surprised.
I'll bet you Joe Biden's alive in 2028.
The fact that he won't have the stress of being president greatly increases that likelihood. It's true. The stress of being the president.
Close to death. He's just not able to be president, right? There's a big.
You have no idea what that can be like. A person can degenerate very quickly when they're at that level, so it's very possible. Like, you don't know when you're that age, anything could happen. A fall could kill you. So it's you don't know. So in my opinion, if he was president, I don't think he would finish his next term. And if he doesn't make it to 2028, I wouldn't be surprised. Him not being president from 2024 to 2028 likely increases his likelihood of survival. Anyway, do you want to give your guess
Well,
as to who's going to win.
yes, Kamala. I agree with you. But I think maybe one point that you haven't talked enough about is the fact that you would rather Trump win, right?
Yeah, that would be my preferred outcome. Am I happy
Okay.
about it? No. Personally, I would have preferred if Robert F. Kennedy could have been the winner, but that wasn't going to happen.
Okay.
But yeah, I would prefer Trump to be the victor. Personally, culturally, I'm in more line with his policies. I think Kamala is. I know you're going to be baffled by this. I think she's far more of an authoritarian than he is. The things that she did in her history revile me as a libertarian. If she were the leader of my country, I would probably want to throw up. The things that she did, if she were to continue doing them as the president of the United States, I would want her impeached. I desperately hope that she doesn't act in those ways. Policy-wise, yeah, economically, I'm more on Trump's side, so that's not really surprising. But I also think that he's a gross person in many ways. So I wouldn't be happy if I was American and had to cast my vote for him, but I would likely would over her, because I could not forgive her for the things that she did to people. She kept people in jail past their term in order to fight wildfires. She kept people in prison that were proved innocent on clerical reasoning. Like, they filed paperwork slightly late, so she kept them in jail. She locked up parents because their kids didn't go to school. It sickens me. But is it better than some of the alternatives? Yeah, she probably is.
Okay. Those things are not all true.
As far as I can tell, they're true.
They're exaggerated. So the idea of putting parents in jail because their kids didn't go to school, there was a policy that she enacted while she was AG that was trying to keep kids in school, because she noticed that if parents play a more active role in getting their kids to school, those kids are going to have a far lower probability of ending up in jail, right? So the goal was to, sorry, just going on low battery mode here. The goal was to keep kids in school. So your point of putting parents in jail, no.
Did the policy say that could be the result?
No, because it wasn't a criminal offense, right, to not send your kid to school. It was a civil offense, right? So there were fines that could be associated with not sending your kid to school.
And what happens if you don't pay the fines?
I'm not sure. It's not a criminal offense, though.
If you continue to rack up fines, there's two things that could happen. They take everything from you, or you end up in jail. Those are the two outcomes possible of not being able to pay fines that you owe. It's the same reason why civil...
Well, those things happen because actually there was a tick up in school attendance. And B, there are clauses for families that, if they refused and if they were charged, there were a couple of different avenues. Anyway, we don't need to get into the specifics. Was she a perfect prosecutor and was she a perfect AG? Absolutely not. The story of Kamala is that she has grown, right? She's made a lot of mistakes in her life. And I think that you can look back to her presidential run. You can look to her time as VP. There's a lot of stuff you can point to. But what I think is great about Kamala, and maybe this will be my closing argument, is that she has learned from these things, right? And I think that she is someone who has, through many trials and many errors, become someone who is ready to be a president for all Americans. And I think that that's been proven most true in the second 2 years of her the second half of her vice presidency, post Roe v. Wade, and also in her, running as vice president with Biden, and now just in the last month as the president. I think that you can see that she has finally kind of come into herself as someone who can be the president. And, you don't become that without some bumps along the way. So, yeah, like she's made a lot of mistakes. But what I believe and what I actually can see is that she has learned from them, and then go.
Well, agree to disagree. Until next time.
Cool. Well, thank you to anyone watching. I think we're just doing this, Kieran and I, because we like having these discussions. But if you are someone who tuned in and kind of had this on the computer, like, appreciate you listening in. I hope that this discussion offered something to you.
Agreed. Like and subscribe, and thanks for stopping by.